So with that, welcome everyone to our Lunch and Learn Climate Smart Floridian series. This has been a 6-week series. We're currently on week 5, Florida friendly landscaping. So far we've covered climate change, energy and green building, water, and food. And to present to us today, we have Carrie Stevenson. We'd like to remind you to put any questions in the chat and we'll try to answer them as they come, or we'll answer them at the end of the talk. And as a reminder, all of the talks are recorded so you can access them later. And at the very end, we'll ask you to answer a quick follow-up survey. So please try to stay till the end to answer that. So with that, thank you. And Carrie, you can get started.
Ready? Good morning, everybody. Thanks again for joining us. I spoke to several of you a couple of weeks ago. I covered water. This time I've got Florida Friendly Landscaping. I spent, I guess, about maybe 6 or 7 years as a Florida Friendly Landscaping agent. So I still incorporate a lot of this information in my talks when I work with people on a number of different topics, but it's certainly a big part of sustainable living in Florida. So we will jump right into it. So a few things, points to just consider is that you want to be strategic with your landscaping. A lot of times people will move into homes and the landscape is kind of already there. But you do have options. You can make choices, and we'll hopefully help you make some wise choices with some of the advice we give today. So we'll go through what Florida Friendly Landscaping is. It's a specific program, produced and used by the University of Florida to teach Florida residents and builders and landscapers the best practices. We'll talk a little bit about composting, fertilizer and water usage today. So some of the things to consider are that landscaping, again, it's not just aesthetics. Ideally you want it to look good. It's part of your home value, but it can work for you too. There are a lot of things that a landscape can provide to you besides just shade, which can provide significant cooling and energy benefits. We have a large oak tree in the back of our house that keeps our bedroom cooler than the rest of the house in the summer. And that makes a difference in your heating and cooling bills. But also, things like providing wildlife habitat, providing space for pollinators, and other sorts of things. There's a lot of benefits to landscaping wisely if you put a little strategy into it. So Florida Friendly Landscaping, again, this program has been around for probably close to 25 years at this point. The idea was that Florida faced a lot of water quality problems, and many of those stemmed from homeowner use of fertilizer, pesticides, and overwatering. And so the idea was that if we work with the communities in our state to design landscapes that can conserve those natural resources, that can add to them instead of sort of having a contentious relationship. It helps people find the plants that are more low maintenance and environmentally sustainable, and kind of teaches you how to maintain those. It's through the University of Florida Center for Landscape Conservation and Ecology, which is on campus and has a number of specialists attached to it, along with a whole team of extension agents like us who work with the community in their counties and regions. So again, what is it? It's basically an approach to maintaining an attractive, colorful, and diverse yard. This one pictured is kind of a standard landscape, but if you, there have often been times when I've driven through new communities and subdivisions, and they've all got the same patch of green grass, and they've got maybe 2 trees. They've got a crepe myrtle in the front and a oak in the back, and there's not much else there. And if you are, again, just moving to Florida, you may not want to do a lot of lawn maintenance and don't want to really think about it. But there are ways to incorporate different types of plants, different layers. As you can see in this landscape, it's not just the ground cover and a taller canopy, you've got little layers of shrubs and taller shrubs and uh, taller ground covers. And so that adding that diversity can make it a little more interesting and friendly to wildlife. We have a ton of interesting species that live here. Pollinators, of course, lots of interesting insects and uh, birds birder for those interested in observing birds, but tons of besides butterflies and the sort of attractive insects that everybody's interested in. There's a lot of other stuff that really does plays a role in our landscape and does some of the dirty work that keeps us all sort of thriving. Beyond that, there's also lots of reptiles and mammals that might live in there. And honestly, once you have more of a Florida friendly landscaping in place, it can be a lot less work than a traditional landscape. If you think about a home that has, predominantly turf coverage, you've got to mow it, you've got to water it, you've got to apply fertilizer, possibly apply pesticides. And if you can reduce that amount of lawn with another type of plant or mulch or something like that that doesn't need as much regular maintenance, then you can reduce a lot of the work that you have to do. So the goals overall are to conserve water and protect water quality of those larger creeks, rivers, bays that are downstream. And then it's covered in 9 principles. I'll go through these during my talk today, but they are as follows: right plant, right place, water efficiently, fertilize appropriately, use mulch, attract wildlife, manage yard pests appropriately, recycle yard waste, reduce stormwater runoff, and protect the waterfront. So that's the core principles of this program. That's kind of the gospel that's been being preached out into the state for Florida friendly landscaping. There are programs for homeowners, for professional landscapers, and also for builders and developers who want to incorporate these from the start in a landscape. So that first principle, again, is right plant, right place. It's kind of the cornerstone of the program. Knowing what your conditions are will help you make wise decisions about which plants will do best. And so you want to do a site analysis. If you have the option to landscape your own yard, or you want to add to, if you have something like this first house where you've got some pine trees and some, maybe some centipede, not sure what turf that is, but they don't have a lot of shade at all. So, and they've got a good bit of space. So looking at that, they could easily, choose if they want to provide some shade, they can plant a pretty good size tree that at mature height and width could provide a lot of shade. And they've got space for the roots, they've got space for the branches. But if it were fully shaded, they might not be able to put turf in, right, or other plants because of that increased shade. So knowing, and if you purchase plants now, they're pretty good about having on the label, this plant does well in full shade or in full sun, or it needs partial shade, or it is fairly shade tolerant. Shade tolerant, even the most shade tolerant stuff is only about 50%. Very few things can grow in complete shade. So just keep that in mind. Knowing what type of soil you have, the pH ranges, again, is a scale of 1 to 14. 7 is neutral. North Florida tends to be slightly more acidic soils. And so we have to keep that in mind when we're planting. South and Central Florida tend to be higher pH. You've got more calcium carbonate or limestone in your soil, whereas we have more of an acidic plant structure that leaches into our soil. So different plants do well, and certain nutrients are only available in certain types of pHs. So it's important to know a little bit about that. Your soil composition, are you really sandy like this photo on the bottom? Do you have some loam? Are you clay soil? That makes a difference as well. Drainage situation, is it a really dry soil? Do you have standing water? Do you have other things in the way that will affect how water flows? Hardscapes are important. And so those structural limitations as well. If you're going to plant a tree, you want to look up and pay attention, because if you've got power lines nearby, you've got a neighbor's house, 2 feet away, that tree is not going to stay the same size as when you planted it. So you want to find out what the mature height is. If it's too big, choose something smaller, and then work with the conditions you have, because you're not going to be able to move the utility lines. You're not going to be able to move the neighbor's foundation. You're not going to be able to move the sidewalk. So you want to make sure that you're planting things that are going to have a good odds of survival. The orientation of your house as well, if you're trying to provide shade, to keep that in mind. A few other areas, if you've got places where just some of the tricks are, if you've got places that are difficult to maintain grass because it's too shady or it's too wet, there are other ground covers you can use. You can see kind of under this tree, they've got a different type of ground cover that's probably more shade tolerant. Under a lot of our trees, we just have self-mulching areas. We just leave the leaves from our magnolia tree, we just rake into a circle below there. Then we don't have to try and grow grass under a really shady condition. We'll talk a lot more about water, but grouping plants according to their water needs. So if you have irrigation, you're able to do that wisely. And then again, choosing the plants based on their mature size. I don't know which came first on this picture of the tree and the power lines, if the power lines were there and somebody planted a tree under it, or if it was there and then they went in and added power lines. But this is not good for a tree. They're maintaining it, centering the survival of the power lines there, but that's terrible for the tree. It's really not going to do well. And again, you want to avoid overcrowding. A lot of times people will come in and they want to completely redo their yard, and they'll just put plants everywhere. And you want to give it some time, give these plants a little bit of space so they're not completely crowding each other out once you're established. So watering, a lot of more than half of our water used outdoors is wasted from inefficient watering systems. So you really want to apply about a half inch of water each time you water, often no more than 2 or 3 days. This little factoid, if you water it for every other day for 15 to 30 minutes, that's 7 feet of water per year that you've applied. And so it depends a lot on the conditions. If you're in a drought condition, you may need to apply more water. If you are in a rainy period, which we often get in the spring and summer, you won't need to water as often. And people, by law, you're supposed to have a rain shutoff device on irrigation systems, and often you don't see those functioning. There have been many, many times I've driven around when it's raining and you see people's irrigation system just completely going. Again, that's a waste of energy. It's a waste of water. It's just a waste of the resource. And so making sure your irrigation system, if you have one, is up to snuff is important. We recommend that you irrigate in the morning. I don't know why this says evening. I didn't mean for that to say that, but you want to have it ideally in the morning. The wind is low, the temperatures are cooler. That's when dew is already on the grass. It's kind of already when the plants are being naturally watered, so it stays there. Once you start applying water in the afternoon, the heat of the sun starts evaporating it, or often the wind will pick up, and so you're losing that water as fast as you apply it. So some places have local ordinances where they restrict watering. Some people will try to water in the evening, but ideally you don't want to do that, because often it won't have time to completely dry out, and so you have sort of the water is applied in the evening and then it stays kind of wet overnight because there's no sun to dry it out. And then you can end up with fungus problems. Again, along those lines, if you get too much water, everything else likes it too. The fungus and the bacteria, the weeds are like, hey, this is great. There's plenty of water here. I'm going to grow too. Um, Turf grass, it'll start growing a shallow root system. If there's always water at the surface, then it doesn't need to send roots down to start looking for water. And so if that is the case, if you develop a shallow root system with your turf grass, if there is a drought or suddenly you can't water, those plants are going to die because they are not able to reach down further and get the water they need. Creates kind of an anoxic condition with the roots, which stresses them. This photo, if you've got dollarweed, a lot of times people will call us and tell us they've got dollarweed all over. That typically means it's too wet. Dollarweed is a native wetland plant, and so it loves it when the soil is really oversaturated. So if we've had a lot of rain or if people are irrigating too much, they'll often get a dollarweed problem. So that's the first recommendation, is to back off on your water. Next is fertilizing appropriately. Every extension office has the capability to test your soil for nutrients. And so you can request a soil test kit from our office. You can also go online and get the information. You can get two kinds of soil tests. There's one that's called the soil test kit, and then there's one that's a little less expensive, but is maybe takes a little bit longer. The horticulture agents at every extension office can help you with this. But basically, you take a little sample, you put it in a bag, you mail it to Gainesville with, a check for like $7, and they'll tell you what your pH is, what your nutrient levels are, your phosphorus, your nitrogen levels, and they'll give you recommendations on what to do. I remember the first time we did a soil test for my own yard, it came back and there were like no nutrients in anything. It was like just this sandy kind of clay yard with no nutrients at all. We're like, oh, okay, that's why the trees are struggling. Again, you want to only apply fertilizer when your plants are actively growing. This time of year, particularly in North Florida when everything is dormant, you don't want to apply it. It's like trying to feed somebody while they're asleep. It's not doing them any good. And so they can only really take up those nutrients while they're actively growing. And then using a deflector shield, we'll talk about that later. Over fertilizing too much can stimulate excessive growth in your yard. And it can also, again, aggravate pest problems just like overwatering can. Using a lot of fertilizer, you don't want it to, I didn't want this to move like this. But again, also if it runs off, you'll see these green ponds. This is called a eutrophic condition. And so it's essentially that fertilizer is fertilizing the algae in the pond too. If you apply too much fertilizer in your own yard, if it rains, you have a lot of irrigation water that runs into a nearby water body, it will send those nutrients over to the nearest pond. And again, it'll have that phytoplankton or that algae will start growing. And then you can end up with a situation like that. And that's problematic. It can also seep into the aquifer where it seeps down into the soil. Again, polluted stormwater runoff is one of the biggest water quality issues in Florida. When you have those green ponds, those eutrophic events, once that algae at that top layer starts dying off, it uses up all the oxygen in the water. And so that robs the fish and the other aquatic organisms in that water body of the oxygen they need to breathe through their gills. So that's how you can end up with fish kills if you have too much fertilizer or that eutrophic condition. So again, we've got a ton of fertilizer recommendations. They're all available online. You can call your extension office. I've got St. Augustine, I've got this much area. I could basically give you a formula, calculate out how much you want to use. You want to keep it stored separately from pesticides and fuel and sort of proper care. There's deflector shields. If you've got a fertilizer applicator, little wheeled carts, basically, where you put fertilizer in. Um, Ideally, you do not want to fertilize within 10 feet of a water body. This is, in a neighborhood, looks like probably their stormwater pond, but they've got a nice riparian area where they've got native plants along the water body. So that helps kind of protect that water from any runoff or any fertilizer application. Deflector shields are exactly what it sounds like when it shoots fertilizer out the side of that applicator cart. A deflector shield will stop it from going that direction. So it'll shoot out instead of both sides, it'll just shoot out one side. And so you would put that deflector shield on the water side so that it doesn't go directly in there. The label is the law for fertilizer and pesticides, so always read those safety instructions. Mulch to me is one of the easiest and best ways to maintain a Florida-friendly lawn. It does so much for you, and it's really quite easy. It kind of regulates the soil temperature it's like kind of an insulator. So it keeps you from having these extremes in heat and cold. It physically inhibits weed germination and growth, and so it's kind of keeps those from popping up. It also provides kind of a contrast. If you do have a weed come up through the mulch, it's easy to see it and pull it. It can protect plants from mechanical damage. I can't tell you how many new trees I've seen get whacked by lawn care folks who get up too close to it to mow or to use weed whackers, and they cut part of the trunk because they're getting too close. But if you have a buffer of mulch around that tree, then you can keep it safer. People will know to stay away from it. Mulch, again, as it breaks down, adds some nutrients to the soil and some structure, which is especially helpful in areas where you have really sandy soil, where all the nutrients kind of leach down through the soil and don't hold a lot of nutrients or organic material at the surface. Mulch will help with that. And it looks great. It's a nice contrast to a landscape. It's really aesthetic addition, and so I'm a big fan. Aesthetics, you can get different colors, scents, textures, that sort of thing. Certain types last longer than others. You want to have a sustainable source of mulch. You don't want to use cypress mulch that is often smells good and looks good, but it's often not harvested sustainably. Sometimes they still do wild harvest of cypress trees just to chop them up for mulch. So we don't recommend that too much. A lot up here, a lot of times we'll use pine bark and pine needle mulch. It's very readily available. I imagine statewide, that's a pretty easy one to use. And then pecan shell mulch is really nice too. That lasts a long time, and it's also a nice kind of brown shade. Different types of mulch break down at different rates. So again, depending on how often, pine straw will break down faster than pine bark, but maybe the straw is less expensive. So you'll want to kind of manage that calculation on your own budget. Moving into attracting wildlife. It's super important to maintain these habitats. When we come in and you have this aerial view of this neighborhood, before anybody lived there, right, there were probably tons of wildlife living there. Or it was a passageway from one good habitat to another one. And so as urban areas come into formerly rural areas, it runs wildlife off. And then you can have some negative interactions, right? In Gulf Breeze, which is Santa Rosa County, which is a county adjacent to where I live, it's the #1 black bear call habitat. FWC gets more calls from Gulf Breeze than they do anywhere else in the state. And a couple of factors. One, is an extremely fast-growing county. There's a lot of development going on there. It's also adjacent to a national park, and that has a lot of bear habitat, and also an Air Force base that has land and a Blackwater State Forest too. And so you have this sort of urban-rural interface, and these bears will show up, in people's backyards, in their pools, taking over their garbage cans. And so, you want to find a balance there. That's not the kind of wildlife you want to attract to your, suburban neighborhood. Um, and so you want to find ways to live with them, to have, plenty of, build maybe more compact areas and leave the larger wooded areas alone so that those larger animals can live there peacefully. There's tons of species though that can live within our neighborhoods. I mean, bats do great, birds do great, squirrels, of course, are ubiquitous. Um, Lots of lizards, frogs, insects, things like that. And so, planting vegetation that provides food and shelter and nesting material for some of those beneficial wildlife are really a major part of the Florida Friendly Landscaping Program. Um, for if you've ever done any wildlife work, you know that they've got to have habitat, and habitat includes food, water, shelter or cover, and space. Space is for finding mates, for having territory, and it depends on the size of the animal how much space they need. Um, Frogs are going to need a lot less space than Florida panther. Um, but again, if we can provide habitat for some of those desirable wildlife, it's easy to do that with plant material. Most of them will eat fruits and nuts or leaves, or they'll eat insects that are attracted to the other fruit, flowers, things like that. Water provision is helpful. They'll need that for a lot of basic functions. Having a small little pond, having a water fountain, having even a pool. I mean, I've had bats dip into my pool to drink water at night. So, even things that you're not deliberately providing for wildlife, sometimes that does happen. If you do provide a water source, make sure that it either has a pump running and circulating the water, or if it's a bird bath, that you rinse it out so you don't become problematic with attracting mosquitoes and adding to that population. Again, some of the flowers, this passion vine, and then milkweed for a lot of the butterflies that are super popular for homeowners to have butterfly gardens. Again, it doesn't necessarily have to be a native species to be wildlife friendly or Florida friendly, but it does need to not cause a problem. It needs to add to be a productive contributor to the landscape. But again, these species really provide a lot of beauty in the landscape and also food for wildlife. Managing landscape pests responsibly is important. So using pesticides is kind of, people default to that when they start seeing insects. But you want to have some realistic expectations. There's no landscape in the world that's going to have zero bugs, zero weeds, zero disease. So, people have different thresholds on what they can handle. But we recommend that people try to use integrated pest management, or IPM. That's a way to essentially use the least toxic method of controlling insect problems before you go towards sprays and poisons. And the way you do this is being familiar with your landscape. If you start to see problem insects, or you see chunks taken out of your plants, something's eating them. One of the more recent examples of this in my own backyard, where we had purchased some hibiscus plants and put them in pots for the backyard. We had kind of redone the landscape, and we wanted, we had having a big party last spring, so we wanted, to add some color to the landscape, and the insects like the hibiscus as well. But we started seeing all the leaves go. So, we just purchased these plants. They were looking great. And then we saw some problems, that all the leaves were gone. So, like, is this some kind of bug? What are we doing? Turned out it was squirrels. It was a squirrel that was eating every single leaf down to the nub. Um, and, so turns out they really like hibiscus. Had not realized that before. So our least toxic method of managing this, we weren't going to hurt the squirrel. We weren't, he was just trying to get something to eat. But we did find that hot pepper will keep them away. So we just poured some hot pepper over our plant, and the squirrel left it alone. It didn't bother the insects or uh, the plant, and we kind of found a balance. So again, for other plants, you may have things like you may be able to like physically remove the pests, right? Like a squirrel, I couldn't physically remove, but if I had, a small infestation of grasshoppers, I could pick those up and move them, throw them away, whatever. Um, or if you see, like in this last picture, if you see beneficial insects, if you had aphids on your plant, but then you saw a healthy population of ladybugs feeding on those aphids, then maybe leave it alone. Let the ladybugs take care of it. So there are a lot of beneficial insects, and be sure to learn those. Spot treat if you do need to use a pesticide. There's also horticultural oils and insecticidal soaps that are less toxic. And again, understanding which beneficial insects are in your yard. If you've never seen a juvenile ladybug, I encourage you to look that up online. They look nothing like an adult ladybug. It looks like, it looks kind of funky. It's long and leggy and no color to it really. And I showed a picture of it to a big group of pesticide applicators once at a continuing education course I was teaching. I said, hey, if you saw this in your client's landscape, what would you do? Raise your hand if you would apply a pesticide to get rid of it. I was like, do you even know what this is? And nobody did. And I said, this is a baby ladybug. So you just have killed off all of your beneficial insects. And so again, there's only, there's a handful of them that are really common. And so it's easy to learn what those are, and to know whether you want to keep those around. Moving into recycling yard waste. This can be as simple as allowing leaves and pine needles to fall, and kind of planning ahead to use those as mulch. You can see this is a nice, neat mulched area and barrier between the landscaped turf area and the pine area. It keeps those nutrients in the landscape. You don't have to apply as much fertilizer. And then again, you can sort of expand that out into the lawn and then reduce the amount of lawn you have to take care of over time. Creating a compost pile with kitchen scraps and yard waste. We highly recommend this. Composting is basically allowing organic matter to break down. You want to use a balance, like this illustration shows, of greens and browns. Browns are typically just going to be your leaves and a lot of your yard waste. Whereas the greens are going to be maybe your grass clippings, and then vegetables and fruits from your kitchen scraps. Again, only plant material. You don't want to use any animal-based material that's going to attract, pests outdoors. It's going to be rancid and cause problems. So you only use vegetable material. You can use coffee grounds. You can also use eggshells. But again, this is a great way to kind of create some of your own soil, reduce some of the fertilizer you need. And, it's kind of a fun project, really. I enjoy composting. Our second to last Florida-friendly landscaping practice is reducing stormwater runoff. So the idea is that when it rains, you want to keep the water in that landscape and hold it and allow that rainwater to just infiltrate into the soil there. When it runs off, that's when it starts causing problems. It picks up nutrients from the roads, from the hard surfaces, and causes problems. You can install rain gardens. These are basically kind of miniature stormwater ponds. You can sort of have a bowl type shape or a swale type structure, and then you plant it with Florida-friendly landscaping plants, and allow the rainwater to run in there and absorb some of that water instead of going elsewhere. It's also called bioretention, and they use that in a good bit of development. You can use porous surfaces for walkways instead of having hard poured concrete walkway. Use something with some space in between it, like those pavers in the top photo. It allows some rainwater to go through there. You can use gravel or mulch for driveways as well. Um, Directing downspouts and gutters to porous areas so that when it rains, when the rooftop rainfall comes off your roof and down a gutter, it doesn't go into the street or into your driveway, but it goes back into the soil. Um, I don't know if anybody has ever done any rainwater harvesting or used a rain barrel or a cistern. Um, this is a kind of a fun project to do too, but you can use, we use pickle barrels, or they often sell them at farm supply stores. Usually they're 55, 60-gallon barrels that have a screw top lid. You can attach those to the bottom of your gutter, your downspout, and then add a faucet at the bottom, attach it to a hose, or just collect the water and use it out in the landscape. But it's a nice feature to have outdoors to kind of save some of your water for a sunny day. Then having there's these rain gardens. This is sort of illustration of some. You can use rocks and gravel, or you can use plant-based rain gardens. But that one they've got kind of coming off their gutter as well. It's finally protecting the waterfront. Having a buffer zone between manicure landscape and the shoreline helps protect that waterfront from the fertilizer and pesticides that are going in on some lawns. And also having that border of more low maintenance plants between the lawn and the shoreline can absorb nutrients and prevent erosion, and also provide a good bit of wildlife habitat. It's a nice kind of transition from sort of the, dedicated lawn area to kind of the wilder edge of the water. We definitely recommend planting native trees. There's usually tree giveaways throughout the state, between Arbor Day in January and Earth Day in April. You can usually find a tree giveaway. Again, make sure you've got space for the tree. It'll start off as small as the one this little guy's holding, but it could be, an 80-foot tree with a 50-foot, span for the branches by the time it's done growing. So do a little research into the species that you're planting and make sure that works. We also have a lot of information on the proper tree planting methods. Often people will plant trees too deep. You want to get where you see this little root flare where the base of the trunk goes into the soil. It sort of spreads out to the side. You want that just slightly above the soil. And not under the surface. People plant them too deep, and the roots can't get enough oxygen or enough water. And so, again, using the backfill soil and putting some mulch near the tree, but not piled up against it, again, because that can cause issues as well. There are plenty of lawn alternatives if you're not necessarily a turf grass person. To the right is powder puff mimosa. This is a surface running plant that has little sensitive leaves like regular mimosa, but it's really small. It has the powder puff is this little pinkish purple bloom that comes up. Bees love it. It's really attractive to insects and other pollinators. On the left here, you can see lots of ground covers, flowers, and native grasses that are being used instead of turf. We have a lot of resources, both online and hard copies. The photos here are handbooks. The one on the left is for homeowners. The one in the middle is for homeowners and landscapers. It's a really nice guide to plant selection, landscape design. So it will basically, it lists tons and tons, hundreds of plants. This categorizes them by, large tree, small tree, shrub, ground cover, vine, that sort of thing. It has information on what climate they do well in, whether they're full sun, what kind of water they need. That's available online, and there's hard copies at most extension offices. And then the one on the right, the Best Management Practices for Protection of Water Resources by the Green Industry. That's a book that we use to teach what we call the Green Industry's Best Management Practices course, that any professional landscaper who applies fertilizer has to take this course and get a license to apply fertilizer on someone else's yard. And so we have, again, all these are available online. There are also apps. If you go to, Apple or Android and search for the Florida Friendly Plant Guide, or there's an ordinance app, there's a toxic plant app, there's a butterfly garden app, and a bee garden app. And this will tailor it to your location, the types of plants you want to use. And you can also use it on a computer. So if you go to these Florida Friendly Landscaping website, it'll get you to these apps so you can use those and play around with them. The ordinances, they're each county, sometimes even different cities, have different ordinances about when you can apply fertilizer. These are especially important to landscape professionals because it can vary depending on which city or county you're in. So this one kind of maps out the differences there. This is what the Florida Friendly Landscaping Plant app looks like. If you were to download it to your phone, you can see some screenshots, but it goes through all of these different species. You can search by your zip code and say, what works well in this zip code, and it'll start giving you options. So these are really cool resources. This information we'll share with you after the fact, all these links, including our email addresses, and links to the soil testing lab and the Florida Irrigation Society. And as Megan mentioned at the beginning, this is our 5th out of 6 presentations. So we have one more next week on consumption, and that will wrap up our series. So with that, we've got about 15 minutes, I think. I see there's a few questions or comments in the chat. If anybody has questions, please feel free to let us know how I can help you, and what questions you have.
Yeah, thanks so much, Carrie. That was great. And those squirrels, you just never know.
I mean, it's always something. I had no idea how much they loved hibiscus, but boy, I would watch him just jump off the pergola and attack, and we just had to laugh.
Yeah. So we do have a couple questions. Alicia put a bunch of resources and links to some of your blog posts in the chat, so that's sort of like at the beginning.
Cool.
But Sarah asked, literature is mixed regarding mulch and bagged compost products' ability to affect soil pH. Should the average homeowner be concerned about it?
I it's going to take a lot of anything to really change your soil pH. If you put bags and bags of lime all over your soil to try and increase your pH, then maybe it'll do that. But changing the soil pH is tougher than adding nutrients. So I wouldn't think it's something you could be super concerned about. If you're adding some mulch and you're concerned, I wouldn't think that's going to be a big issue. So,
All right, great. Catherine asked, what do you think about sweet potatoes as ground cover?
I mean, that's a pretty fun idea. I have never used that as a ground cover per se, but I mean, I think it could definitely work double duty, right? If you're wanting to have a garden and use those leaves as a ground cover. I don't know a lot about doing that, but I think that I think that's a pretty cool idea. Sweet potatoes, as long as you're using actual sweet potatoes and not like the wild taro that is that is a invasive species. So make sure you're, using something that's not going to take off.
Yeah, definitely. Try to stick to native if you can, or at least um, things you might use in a vegetable garden. So,
Yeah. Yeah.
we have a question on, I would like to test my soil to determine contaminants, I think is the question. How can I do that? I know you had talked about
Um,
like nutrients, like soil testing UF does, but
yeah. It might take a specialty lab to look at contamination issues. I'm not sure what you'd probably need to know what you're looking for. Often with these soil and water things, it's not just like a general test where they can tell you what's in everything. You have to be looking for something specific. So if they're, if there's um, brownfield site or a Superfund site, and you're afraid there's leaching or something, you may have to go to a private testing facility to do that. Because from everything I know about our soil testing, it's just going to give you pH and nutrient levels. So I don't think they test for metals or specific contaminants. So yeah,
yeah, I know the test does like micronutrients.
yeah,
So, but
yeah,
yeah, not, I haven't heard of it doing like contaminants specifically, but
yeah. I'd
um,
reach out to your local extension office and ask them if they have a testing lab they'd recommend nearby.
yeah, that's a great idea. So we love that we have programming that teaches landscapers. How about any thoughts about HOAs specifically?
Yeah, so a lot of the folks who are Florida Friendly Landscaping agents specifically work with and reach out to HOAs. Sometimes they'll invite them to come in and speak. Sometimes I've had some folks reach out to me. I had written about stormwater ponds and maintenance, and this HOA, the leadership asked me to come out and give them some recommendations on maintaining the stormwater ponds that they had. Um, so yeah, I think absolutely that's a phenomenal audience for this. And there are, you know, there are certainly differing opinions on what is, you know, what a landscape should look like, right? And so educating folks that there are different ways to be Florida friendly. Some people like a very kind of traditional, specific look, but um, you definitely have a lot of leeway between, you know, some turf and two trees and the, vast scale of canopy. But yeah, we have a lot of agents who specifically work with HOAs and stay very busy just working with them and troubleshooting and giving talks. So yeah.
Yeah, so definitely contact your local extension office and see if
Mhm.
there's, yeah, a program. Um, this is an interesting question. So you already talked about squirrels, but how can you deter iguanas from eating plants?
Man, I'm gonna have to defer to my South Florida people. We don't have iguanas up here. I mean, every now and then somebody will let one loose, but um, anybody down further south? Alicia, Holly, got any recommendations?
We don't have iguanas, unfortunately. Um,
Alicia,
oh,
there we
Alicia's
go. What
popping
do you
on. There
know?
you go.
Thoughts?
Yeah, it really is. I'm down here in the Keys, and I'll be talking to you all next week. It really is a right plant, right place. There's certain things they love and certain things they'll avoid. And unfortunately, they've grown accustomed to enjoying our natives, as well as, our non-native species. So it's a battle. It got cold enough this morning, though. Like if you were anywhere north of Key Largo, you might have been able to round them up and humanely dispose of them. That would be my best offer of advice.
Yeah, there were certainly several like announcements FWC put out with either dead or frozen iguanas and how to sort of dispose of them or bring them someplace for, yeah. So when we
I
had
just
the
remember,
freeze earlier this month. So
I'll just never forget. I think it was Shannon Carnivale who tells the story of somebody picking up a frozen iguana and putting it in their car, and they were
okay.
calling her because they were going to bring it to her because they didn't know what to do with it, and then and it thawed out in their car and started crawling all over them. So don't put them in your car and take them anywhere.
Yeah, keep them, you need to keep them contained, like in a
Yeah, yeah.
bag or
Put them in a
container or
bag or something.
something.
Yeah.
Yeah, like yeah. Don't assume that it's alive, not that it's dead, I guess. So, but I don't think I see anything else. One person did ask about successful programs to collect and share mulch in a community, and then any good lessons learned to share. And a couple people have responded. But if you,
Yeah, our similar to what Alicia said, our local uh ECUA, our utilities authority has a mulch program where you can come and pick some up, where you can get that for free. Um, and there's some places where they'll let you come gather pine straw and that kind of thing. Um, see somebody mention edible fruit trees. Sometimes they'll have in the small trees section, they might have fruit trees listed. I don't know if it's categorized by fruit, but certainly it'll if they do provide fruit, edible fruit, it would mention that um,
Mhm.
in the information. Those are always the most popular trees. When I've done tree giveaways, the smaller fruit trees go before anything else.
Yeah.
And so those are a great addition to a landscape because they're flowering often and look really nice, and then you get some fruit from them. Um, so I definitely recommend fruit trees.
Mhm. Unless you have a freeze, and then you're sad that
Unless
your
you have a
mango
freeze and
tree
then
might
you
not make it.
yeah, we had this wonderful, tangerine tree that bit the dust a couple years ago, and I was so sad.
Mhm.
It
But
had it would
that's
give 300, 400 oranges every year,
yeah.
and you know, no more.
I think that was it. I did put up the poll because I know a couple people were saying they had to go. So before you leave, if you can take a second to fill that out, we greatly appreciate it. And if anyone has any other questions, feel free to put them in the chat. We can stay on a minute, but we'll be meeting again next week for our last session. Like Alicia said, she'll be talking to us about consumption. It's always a very fun conversation. So we hope to see you next week.
Awesome. Thank you all for your participation and your good questions.